where you're seated and it isn't recorded, nobody's going to know what you said. And so there won't be a frame of reference for those folks who might follow up with this later. Um, no secret to anybody who has picked up any newspaper or read any internet article or has been exposed to internet articles recently about challenges with substance abuse, in particular fentanyl. Is something that has hit many of us very directly. I'll even let you know that I have a nephew who passed away this last just down the street, actually, from a fentanyl overdose. So this hits close to home, and I know that it can hit any family, and is devastating. So it's important that if we're considering the safety of our houses of worship, that we have to have some knowledge about substance abuse for recognition purposes, to understand what is out there, and to make sure that we know some resources in terms of how to intervene. So we felt that this was a very important topic. Behavior and risk assessment, de-escalation techniques, and medical treatment all may be necessary as we consider making our houses of worship safe. Um, and often there are co-occurring things that happen, and one of the co-occurring things that we see often, and I'll tell you, we see this in the county jail quite often, 3 co-occurring things: mental health issues, homelessness, and substance abuse. And those are substantial challenges that we have in our society. Um, it seems more and more we encounter individuals in crisis because of substance abuse and or addiction issues. The more we know about substance abuse, the better we're going to be able to respond to those who are suffering from the effects. Our last speaker for the day is Jason Martin, who's going to talk about substance abuse trends. Jason is the Trauma Services Manager for Memorial Central UC Health, supporting multiple trauma centers in the southern region of Colorado. Jason has been a paramedic and a registered nurse for over 30 years. He spends a significant portion of his has spent a significant portion of his career in emergency medicine and speaks locally and nationally on a variety of topics with an emphasis on drug prevention, drug awareness, and trauma care. Folks, would you please welcome to the podium Mr. Jason Martin.
Thank you, sir. Oh, all right, you bet. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate everyone hanging around for this topic. It is sometimes people often leave depressed, I think, but hopefully you'll leave a little bit more with some more awareness of this topic. A couple things I like to start off that I don't do very well. I talk fast. The reason I talk fast is because this can be an 8-hour workshop, a 4-hour workshop, a 2-hour class, or a 20-minute, what do you want to know about? And so when someone gives me an hour, which is great, and I'm very appreciative of, I have to pick and choose what I want to talk about. And more than likely, I probably put about 5 or 7 minutes of too much stuff, and so that gets me moving kind of quick. Please, if I say something that doesn't make sense, you have a question about it, or you just want me to slow down, just slow down, and that's fine. I will ask some questions throughout the talk. I want to kind of keep things moving, but I do think it's important for some of these things to ask some questions, and I'll stay here as long as I need to this afternoon to answer any questions that you have. Handouts, for this talk specifically, I've kind of gotten away from handouts because unfortunately what I tell you today may be different a year or 18 months from now. So you're going to have my email address and phone number at the end of this. You can email me. I'll send you an 800-slide presentation on every drug you can ever imagine, more than you would ever want to know. Or if you want to know something specifically about a certain drug, I'd be more than happy just to send that to you. And so that's kind of the reasons why some of the things I'll talk about either can get outdated or it may not really apply to where you live, or hopefully we have folks in here that will continue on and help spread some of this information that I'm sharing with you guys. So about maybe 15 or 16 years ago, I was working in a level 1 trauma center in Southwest Missouri. And I had been a nurse and medic for quite a while, and I hadn't been in trauma services that long, but we had a call for coming to the emergency room for a 17 or 18-year-old that was in full cardiac arrest. He'd gotten into an altercation with EMS and law enforcement, and so there's some trauma components to it, and so I responded to the trauma like I would any other trauma. But when we got there, we had a very unusual report of a homeowner that had saw this young person in their yard, and obviously got concerned and called for law enforcement. They arrive and realize this person, something's not right, whether it's a behavioral health issue or it's a drug or toxin, but this wasn't a person that was looking to necessarily break into someone's home or whatever the case may be. So long story short, they had a very hard time getting this person subdued so they could send him to the hospital, basically. He was tased a couple times. It really didn't have an effect, so he would reach down and pull out the prongs. He was pepper sprayed. He was hit a couple times with batons, and they were finally able to get him subdued, and on the way to the hospital, he went into full cardiac arrest in front of the medics. And so it started what they would do in any case, but I was like, that's a very unusual story, because nothing was done from a traumatic standpoint to cause this person to go into cardiac arrest. One of the things that our staff noticed, he was very, very hot to the touch. And whenever we took his temperature, it went to 108 and just started blinking. And so there's only a couple of really things that can cause that. He certainly wasn't entrapped in a closed garage in, the middle of summer. And so I had seen a weather time with a cocaine overdose, but he really didn't, match the photo of that. And so I said, well, I bet this is Jimson weed. And everyone looked at me, and I saw an episode of CSI on Jimson weed. And they all looked at me like, oh, wow, really? I'm like, yeah, it can cause really high temperatures. It can. I wasn't lying, but they didn't ask me to state my source. So they did a drug toxicology. It was negative. And they worked this poor young person for about 45 minutes, and then they called it. And everyone just sit back and really kind of scratched their head and couldn't figure out what happened. And we didn't really know until about, maybe it was about 3 months later when we got a toxicology report back from St. Louis University. And that was our first bath salt patient. And we had heard of these type patients, and there was stuff in the media about it, and it was really our first synthetic drug exposure that we had seen and experienced and really seen firsthand. You can read articles and you can watch shows, but until you really see someone like that, it's really hard to get your mind wrapped around it. So at the time, my boss had asked me, actually, she told me, but regardless, she was like, we need to do better injury prevention here, and so would you be interested in that? And I really didn't have a background in that. I was like, sure. What does that mean? What do? I can talk about helmets and distracted driving, all that kind of stuff. Like, no, all that's great, but we need you to go into schools and talk about drug prevention and awareness. And I thought, okay. Well, at the time, I think my daughter was 15, 30, like a sophomore, maybe a freshman. And so I went home to her, and I was like, how do I, this is what I have to do. Do you have any tips or anything like that? And she goes, heard it. We've heard about drug prevention since kindergarten. I know. So I really struggled before I talked to this group, because I'm like, they've heard all this for so long. And so I got asked to come speak to a large school, and I went in there. I get up on the podium, and I was nervous, and I don't get nervous very often, but I was standing there. I have all these young people, and they're looking at me, and some of them are on their phones, of course, and not paying much attention, which is expected. And I said, how many of you in here have had a don't do drug talk? Every hand. Went up. And so I said, okay, I'm not here to tell you not to do drugs. And the superintendent and the principal looked at me, and they're like, oh, we've made a horrific mistake. And, but then, and I'd obviously done some background and, looked up some research on talking to young people and prevention. And I just said, look, I just want you guys to understand what substances are out there before you put it into your body. And then that way you can make an informed decision. Because believe it or not, there's studies and research out there that shows if you have a 14-year-old and a 45-year-old, one is not more risk-taking than the other if they understand and have all the information. And so at first I didn't believe it, because I'm like, there's no way. But there was 3 studies, independent studies, and one was in a different country, and they all showed the same thing. And one example I used to kind of prove that is, once again, I was in Missouri. Missouri's known for one drug. Anybody want to guess what it is? Methamphetamine, right? I love it when someone will ask me to come talk at their conference, and they're like, can you do one more talk? You're from Missouri. Can you talk about meth? Sure. Anyway, and so Do you think we have a meth problem in our schools in Missouri? Very rarely do we ever have any meth found in a school, high school, junior high, middle school. Why do you think that is? They know what it is. They know exactly what, they've heard it to death, and they believe it. And so that was always kind of one of the examples I used. Now, it took years and years and years and years to get to that point, and there were certainly other substances they were fighting with. But then I quickly realized when I'm dealing with younger people, half of them are going to test you right off the bat. Do you know what you're talking about? And are you going to be truthful? So I had a hand go up, and I believe I was in the junior high at this time, and I had a young person stand and said, I heard heroin makes you feel good. Is that true? So would somebody like to share with me how they would answer that? Yeah, you would. Is that what you said? Who said that? You would say, yes, it does? Oh, honesty. Okay, that's a unique approach. What else? What do you guys think? What's the concern about that? It's tough, right? But if you say no, and a lot of people I've talked to are like, no, well, you're lying, because it's the same endorphin that surges in their brain is that when they take a lot of other substances. And I don't go around junior highs and tell kids that heroin makes you feel good, right? But it's important that you're honest and truthful with whoever you're talking to. And that was one of the things I learned pretty quick. Another thing I learned pretty quick, things are very, very unique and different depending on where you're at. They can even be different here compared to Colorado Springs, primarily. That's my kind of service area. You can see differences. Now, we don't really see that as much in Colorado, but some other states, Missouri being one of those, we saw zero LSD, hallucinogenic, stuff like that in Kansas City, but they saw flipped. None in St. Louis, none in Springfield, but a ton of it in Kansas City. Not much meth in St. Louis, but Kansas City, and so they were very geographically different. And so one of the schools I went to, I would show this slide. And this was in my service area. And so I would put them up there one at a time and let kids guess. And whoever knows the answer, you can yell it out. One at a time. Alcohol. You cannot rub alcohol into your skin and get high. Marijuana at the time wasn't legal in your state, and you can't buy it by the gallon or barrel. I'm sorry? Caffeine. You cannot rub caffeine into your skin and get high. There's the right answer. I've only had 2 right answers in 30 years. And one other one was a high school student. Liquid nicotine. It really hit the area, and like I said, it depends on where you're at, around 2015 and 2016. But you know what I heard for answers? LSD, acid. What? And I was like, what are you talking about? And so finally, like after the 6th class, because I do the same talk 7 times in a school. And so the last one, I'm like, okay, hold on. And I was looking back at the teacher and the resource officer. I'm like, we don't have LSD or acid in Southwest Missouri in 2006, 17, wherever I did this talk. And so I'm like, what does it look like? Well, it's like little strips of paper, and you put it underneath your tongue. I'm like, oh God, they're describing LSD. And so afterwards, I talked to the resource officer, and he goes, we've actually seen some in our high schools. And it just blew me away, and I never would have known about it unless I wouldn't have heard this say, yeah, we're trying to get information out, send stuff to the parents. And so for whatever reason, they had issues with it probably for about 5 or 6 years, and until finally it went back to a very rare occasion than the other, main popular drugs that we see. And so you can learn a lot from our young people. Sorry, I'm kind of slow on the slides, but yeah, liquid nicotine. And I did check this, and you still can buy it legally by the gallon, and a teaspoon of that will kill a child if absorbed through the skin. So this afternoon, I'm going to jump around a little bit, and I apologize for that, but like I said, I feel like these 3 components are important. Treatment, we're going to talk about a little bit of the treatment for some of these things, especially treatment that's available to the layperson. I want to talk a little bit about prevention and just kind of update you on some of the newer things that are out there. I can't hit everything. Like I said, I apologize for that. Question, yes?
Why would you buy a gallon of liquid nicotine?
So what we were told was because people will make their own. The question was, why would you buy a gallon of liquid nicotine? Because you can buy that liquid of nicotine, and then you can add flavors to it and mix it, and then break it out into e-cartridges for e-cigarettes. Yes, ma'am.
You can also make your own bug poison when they're plant sprays.
Yeah, which is another great prevention topic that you can also.
Yes,
kill weeds and animals, small animals with it.
September 11th, I bought a can of beer and I asked for chewing tobacco because I was making nicotine tea for my garden. You wouldn't believe the looks.
I'm sure. I can imagine. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about. I've spent thousands of dollars on higher education, and I am just 100% believing that you cannot teach someone to spell. So my daughter, who is now 29, and is the first Martin in our family to get her PhD, which she just got last month, in English. My wife is the director of trauma for Children's, the Anschutz campus here in Denver, and then also in Colorado Springs. That's why we moved here, was she was recruited to open up the Children's Hospital in Colorado Springs. And so she can spell a little bit, but my daughter wanted no part of healthcare. And so she would proofread my talks. And she would go through there, and I did a lot of like parenting workshops for a while, and I talked to just communities, and they wanted to know about the drugs and stuff like that. And she kept seeing these, and finally she said, "Do you tell people that you're a parenting expert?" "No." And she goes, "Okay, because I just feel like that you should probably tell people that you're not an expert on parenting." I'm like, "Thank you, I'll make sure." So yes, I am not an expert on parenting, even though I have one child. She's 29, she just got her PhD. She's dated, married the same boy since 8th grade. So I feel like her mother did a good job despite my influence. So why do people do what they do? And you know, this is one of the common questions, and I think there's not just one reason for this, but I do think it's important. A lot of people talk about, you know, the audiences that you talk to for prevention and things like that. And one of the reasons why we spend a lot of times on our youth is because they're the main group that's trapped. They're trapped in schools and trapped in these places where we can reach so many of them at a time. And we understand that the teen brain doesn't mature until 22, 23, depending on what article you read, in females, and then 24 to 25 in males, if ever. And so they're still trying to figure out that decision-making process of brain. It's really the last thing that is matured. So if somebody asks you why people choose to try any of these substances we're going to talk about, what are some of the reasons why that you hear? Whether you believe them or not, what are some of the things that you hear? Peer pressure. Curiosity. Bored. It's legal. Fun. It makes you feel good, right? We already established that. Rebellion. They just want to do something different.
Depressed.
I'm sorry?
Depressed.
They're depressed. They want to feel different. Absolutely. So all of those are certainly correct. And here's just some of those that are up there. I'll tell you the ones that I put most emphasis on, and some of them are very scary. The first one is this. I did a ton of education, obviously, in this part of Missouri for a long time, and so I got to know a lot of people. And I had a mom that came up to me, and she said that my 13-year-old, I just had to take to the doctor because she was having female problems. And she said, so I took my daughter to the gynecologist, and they did an exam, and he stopped, or actually she stopped, and just pushed back from the bed and said, "What are you doing?" And her mom was just like, what are you talking about? And the girl just started crying, and she was like, something's wrong. Your women parts are messed up. And so she admitted to doing tamponing, where you take tampons, you soak them in alcohol, and then you insert them, and then you absorb alcohol throughout the day. And of course, she pushes her friend in the grease right away because her and her friend did it together. So she said, "Millie and I do it." And she was just horribly mortified, and her mom was mortified. And she did that because she couldn't get through a school day without having withdrawals. She wasn't trying to get drunk to tolerate geometry better. She wasn't trying to rebel. None of the reasons that we really heard, except for she had to do it or she would get nauseated, she would get diarrhea, she would start to sweat, and she would go through withdrawals. So you can physically get dependent on something. It doesn't matter what age you are. You don't have to do it for years and years and years. I would tell you that the drug industry is trying to make and manufacture new drugs now to where it happens very quickly. And so that kind of leads into my second one of one of the most dangerous ones up there, and we have to start talking about it. The days of experimentation are gone. I know a lot of people, I even talked in the audience, and they'll be like, "Oh, I experimented with XYZ in college or whatever. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have done it, but you know, it is what it is. That's what you do in college." Those days are gone. There's so many people now, there's so many toxins and drugs out there that you will die the first time you use it. You can become physically dependent the second time that you try something. Experimentation is deadly. You have no idea what you're taking. And they're literally, you can have two different pills coming out of the same Ziploc bag that you got from the same person, and they'd be two completely different chemically substances, and one can kill you. And so I think we have to start thinking in the lines of one-time use is very, very deadly. Yeah, all those certainly true. And like I said, this could be certain talks within themselves. I will say this, when I talk to younger people, I'm very honest, and parents for that matter, our kids do a great job. They really do. I think sometimes when I leave schools, kids are like, most of the kids are pretty good. Almost all kids are making great choices. The people who use illicit drugs in our country and are supporting that illicit market is not kids. It's people in the workforce. It's people from 18 to 27. Once again, I can't trap 18 to 27 in a room and talk to them. And we know that prevention takes time, and it's almost like a culture change, right? You have to understand it and you have to know it, so therefore we try to start with young people. But most kids are really pretty good and they make great decisions. The other slide I want to talk to you about that is that one in the last corner. These are the three things that we heard all the time in the hospital. Well, my daughter makes good grades. My son's very active in sports, music. Yeah, because no musician or sports athlete has done drugs. Their circle, I before E, that's wrong. Anyway, their circle of friends haven't changed. Well, that doesn't mean they have to, right? And so these can't be the things that we're looking for to be the end-all, be-all of, oh no, my kiddo may have a problem. It's not always the case. Certainly these things can be changed, and they can change very quickly. We also hear, something changed, and they don't hang around with these people anymore, and their grades just dramatically dropped. Absolutely, those happen too. But this isn't the gold standard of things that we should be watching for in folks before we start asking some difficult questions. Very, very geographically different, and I talked about this before. We really see a lot of differences from one state to another. Geographically, you start to see some things that are pretty common. And also drugs are like fashion. They go in and out of style. And a lot of times it's just simply because however drugs are getting into that community, that pipeline has changed. And the people who brought these drugs into that county, for example, maybe can't get anymore. Now they've changed. So sometimes things change very quickly. And once again, it makes prevention very difficult because things sometimes just disappear, or they'll come back, quote, in fashion or in style that we haven't seen for years. I'm not going to put you guys to sleep with a ton of brain chemistry and stuff like that, but I do think a couple components are important to understand, and I'll refer back to one of these slides here in a second. But it's important to understand that your body hates all drugs. It hates it. It will neutralize it. It'll find it, neutralize it, and excrete it as fast as it possibly can. Because your body doesn't like it. It's foreign. Does that mean we should stop taking our blood pressure medicine? No, absolutely not. It just simply means, that's why there's very few one pill and you're cured from something. This is why if you have blood pressure, you take medicine once, twice a day, and you may have to take it for the rest of your life or until something changes, right? Because your body finds it, neutralizes it, and excretes it. What's the most dangerous drug that someone can take too much of? Yep. And I hear people all the time, I got all my stuff locked up, I got our prescription meds, all that stuff, but then Tylenol's sitting there. That is the most, there's a couple other ones if you mix it with alcohol, but this right here, if that's taken too fast and healthcare can't address it and get to it quick enough, there's nothing you can do. It literally will destroy your liver. And so if you truly have concerns, if you have people that come to your home and you're the house that's where a lot of people get together so you can kind of watch stuff, and I think that's awesome. But this is one of the things that you have to be very mindful of is Tylenol in itself is very, very dangerous. Drugs have in common, it doesn't matter if it's heroin, ecstasy, meth, whatever you want to pick, every single person who's addicted to them will tell you the same thing. So we live between 4 and 6. That's our mood. This is a mood line, right? That's where we live, right? Something horrible happens, we drop to a 4. Something wonderful happens, you go up to a 6. Friday's a 6. Monday's a 4. Maybe not to that extreme. But when people take a drug for the first time, it will send them to a 9 or a 10. You can't get there any other way. And so they get this great euphoric feeling, but then they drop down to like a 4.5. So then they take the drug again because they want to feel it again. Now they get to an 8.5, and they drop to a 4. Then they take it again, they get to a 8. Maybe they take more of the substance or more often. and then they drop even lower below that baseline. And it doesn't matter, whatever drug that someone takes, you ask them the exact same thing, they'll all tell you the same thing. I wake up, I feel like garbage, like a 1 or a 2, and I take whatever drug I take to get back to feel back to a 5. People, you quickly lose that high euphoric, and this is why I'm doing it. I do it so I can go to work, go to school, function. And I think a lot of us, if you'll admit to yourself, caffeine's this is for some people. My wife stopped, I don't know why she does this to herself. She stops caffeine like once a year. And then in the winter, typically, because she's a cold-natured person, she'll start drinking Starbucks again in the cold. And then she's miserable for about a week. Because when she stops it, she has horrible headaches and she feels bad. And I think a lot of us are like this. They start drinking coffee in the morning, they switch to tea or caffeine, whatever other caffeine of choice is. And you're not doing it to feel energetic and feel great. You do it so you don't get a headache, you don't feel bad. Right now, I'm not trying to compare caffeine to some of the other drugs, but it's really very similar. All right, please don't be frightened by this slide. Those buckets, okay, so those little orange little balls are basically the stuff that makes us feel good. Cocaine is the little white ones. And then those buckets that you see down there, that's what the dopamine will pop into that little box, and then it sends us good effects. We all have this normally. Some people who like, it may not be the healthiest, so you like driving fast or jumping out of airplanes, then dopamine jumps in that bucket a little more often, and that's basically what happens. And how drugs work is they either get that drug trapped in there, so it'll go on top of the cocaine and trap it in that bucket, or they will just put more of those dopamine balls back into that bucket. And I explain this because we'll come back to this example here in a minute. All right, let's get started with some of the different drugs that are out there. Drugs itself, depending on what textbook you read, I talk about them with 3 classes: uppers, downers, and then the drugs that make us think completely different than reality, or hallucinogenics. Some medications or drugs belong in multiple categories, which is very common. And it depends on what someone takes or how much, will depend on what type of effects they get from that. I get a lot of questions about methods of use, so how someone takes a substance. Slang terminology can be very misleading. And so anytime you hear a slang terminology, it's imperative that you ask a follow-up question. I've been hot railing smack all day. Well, I don't know what that means. I know what that means, like by definition, but when you ask somebody, they may say, well, I've been taking cocaine and I've been snorting it. Okay, that's not what either one of those 2 things mean. So it's important when you're talking to someone and they use slang terminology, ask them, I'm sorry, I just don't know what smack is. And it could be heroin, could be cocaine. It's actually heroin, but for a lot of times they hear these things too. And so it's important to ask those other questions. Buccal or parachuting, that's how we initially saw people taking bath salts, because they're very fine crystals like salt. And you only take a couple of them, and a lot of people, and you really don't even take enough to where someone would snort it through their nose. And I've had pool water in my nose, and I'm not doing that. It just feels horrible. So I can't imagine, chemical particles. For a lot of people, I'm not doing that. You can't inject it because it's way too strong. And so what we found out people were doing it was they were putting it in toilet paper and swallowing it. Because what does toilet paper do when it hits water? Right. So if you just try to put those little particles in your mouth, it'll absorb in your tongue, underneath your tongue, in your cheek, and you won't get the full effects of it. And so someone figured out that if you put it in toilet paper and then swallow it, you would get the full effects and it wouldn't be too strong. And that's where we got parachuting or bombing come from. Plugging, you can figure that out on your own. Don't Google it at work. Yeah, I get in trouble a lot at work. So another slide I'm not going to spend a ton of time on. I will say that Skittles can mean Skittle parties. And this is when people will get a group of people together and everyone will bring pharmaceuticals from their medicine cabinet. They put it into a bowl and they mix it up, and then they will take random pills with alcohol. Now, when I first heard of it, and I even was doing some teaching on it, I'm like, I just can't imagine this really happening that often. And I've worked with a lot of rehab centers and places like that and gone in and talked to younger people, and those parties happen a lot more than you ever would imagine. And the scary part about these are they're not looking for things that we would think of as something you would abuse, like narcotics or Xanax. They're taking anything, seizure medicine, blood pressure, they're just taking anything. And so unfortunately, a lot of times these things end up very badly with a seizure or someone just blood sugar dropping or whatever the case is. But then Skittles can also mean drinking cough syrup, Once again, asking those additional questions because it can mean a variety of different things. So I had this picture up and it said making a comeback. And that was about 10 or 12 years ago. And boy, did it ever come back, right? And it came back in a variety of different ways. And this is obviously a poppy seed or poppy plant. But I think it's imperative that people understand heroin, synthetic fentanyl, Vicodin, Percocet. I can go the list of all the narcotics. They're either directly from that plant or they're synthetically made from it. And so they're all basically the same and they come from this plant. And so I love it when people say, well, it's all natural. Oh gosh, so is heroin. So is tobacco. That doesn't mean it's good for you. But a lot of people I've talked to, well, it's a plant, it's a flower. How can it be bad for you? I assure you that it is. So one of the things that we've seen over time, the purity. So I fly to Afghanistan to vacation. That'd be odd. Fly to Afghanistan to vacation, I buy a pound of heroin. It's pure, it's 100%. So what I do, I'm like, okay, I need to get this back to the United States. So I pay for it, and I'm like, okay, let's send it back to the United States. I'll wait for it in, Denver. And then every time it would stop at a port or stop somewhere to exchange hands, people would take their piece for payment, right? And so they would take 10% of it. So now you have 90% heroin, but I want my pound when I get it. So I don't want a third of a pound. So what they would replace with it could be chalk dust, milk powder, just nothing stuff. Sometimes it wouldn't be the best for your body, but most of the time it's just like a filler. And so every time it would stop on the way to the United States, people would take their cut and they would fill it with something. So by the time it reached the United States, 10%, 12%. And so if you have 10% heroin, the only way that you can feel the effects to get more of those buckets in the ball is by injecting it. Do you think young people are looking to experiment with injections? There's people that are like, you know what, I've done drugs my whole life and I'm just gonna do that. I'm not shooting anything up though. So it eliminated a whole class of people, especially young people, because they're not putting a needle into their arm. Well, when we had all of the prescription opioid problems and people were getting addicted to this stuff, the drug cartels were like, you know what, if we would keep our concentration higher, i.e., in 2000, it depends on where you're at. You'll see 13 to 17, depending on what part of the country you're in. We would see it as high as 80%. And people are like, why would the drug industry do that? Because you can make it a pill now, and you can swallow it. So you've opened up experimentation for people with heroin a millionfold, because there's a ton of people that'll just take a pill, regardless of what it is, at a party. Oh, it's a pill, can't be that bad. Well, then we saw it drop again. We saw it drop again because the drug industry is like, okay, what if we went back to 20%? Instead of putting milk powder and laxatives and all the other stuff we put in there, what if we put other opiates in there? So we were starting to see Vicodin crushed up and stuff like that. And so we would only see maybe 20% heroin, but there would be other opiates in it. And then that's where fentanyl really hit that niche and really started affecting our country and some others. Because it's not the same fentanyl that we have on the ambulances, we have in the emergency room. This is synthetically made. So when you hear synthetic, it just means it's man-made. It's very easily made if you're a chemist. And so they were making fentanyl and adding it into it. And this is where we would see these mass overdoses to where, and there's just tons of examples where 15, 18 people would overdose, and half of them would be like 2 miles from maybe the house that they purchased at, because they would take it one time and literally they would stop at a stoplight and they would just overdose. And it's because it was way too strong. And then that's kind of where we're at now, where they're really trying to experiment and mix it with stuff that's very dangerous, i.e. fentanyl. The cutting agents I have listed up there, there's a reason that the drug cartels do what they do. Why would you want to put Benadryl in heroin? I can promise you people on heroin don't have a problem sleeping. Have you ever seen somebody, and you may or may not, but people who have just taken opiates or are withdrawing, they're itching and scratching? That's a histamine release. So you get a histamine release from either of those two things. So the drug cartel was like, if you take my heroin, you won't walk around scratching. Your employer won't notice it. Why would you put laxatives in there? Obvious reasons. Any type of opiate slows up our GI system. And so like, we've put some laxatives in there too. That way you don't have those issues either. Good or bad or not, there's reasoning for most of the things they put in there, with the exception of powdered milk and brick dust. The last two chemicals up there, three actually, xylazine and isotoniazine and bromphene. These are new drugs. Xylazine's been around for a long time, but the other two are relatively new, and I'll talk about them a little bit later. But What's scary about these, there's no antidote for it, and they are 10,000 times stronger than morphine. So they're 1,000 times stronger than fentanyl, and there is no reversal agent. Narcan does not work, which we'll talk about. Appearances. We'd all the time get people come in, they drag their kids in or made themselves come in. I took this, and they put a bag of, powder on the desk. You're like, I took this, and it was supposed to be XYZ, and now it's doing this. Can you tell me what this is? No. Please don't bring in a rattlesnake if it bit you, and please don't bring in your drugs. We don't want either. You have no idea what something is. Pure heroin is actually white, but if you mix it with cocoa powder, it looks like that. It can look like a variety of different things, so it's impossible to tell what something is. Liquid form is what we're seeing most drugs being transported by now because they feel like it's easier to conceal. So we're seeing a lot more liquid heroin, liquid methamphetamine, and other liquid substances. If you ever hear the phrase she banging, so it's spelled just like it spells, S-H-E, and then banging, that's when you put this in nasal spray or Afrin, and then you spray it up your nose, and that's how they ingest it. This picture here, you can see that is, if you go to CVS or Walgreens, wherever you buy your prescriptions, that is oxycodone, 80 milligrams. And then on the right was taken off a middle school student. I can promise you that's 80 milligrams oxycodone because we have very strict laws in our country. Every time you take one of those, you're getting 80 milligrams. I have no idea what's in that. There could be 80, there could be 800, there could be nothing. But I will tell you, they look very similar. Anyone can buy pill-making machines online. They're very cheap. This is one of the cheaper ones that you can make or buy. And you can put your own powder in there and press it and make little pills. You can make them scored. You can put an emblem on there to represent your gang. Or you can actually try to match whatever drug you're trying to mimic. And so that's what we're starting to see now is they're trying to make these pills look very close to what a oxycodone or OxyContin would look like. All right, so Narcan naloxone. This was actually, I looked at it and I probably forgot. I want to say it was designed or made somewhere in the 50s. And the 1970s is when it got FDA approval to be a reversal. So what Narcan does, it's very strong. It loves those buckets. See, you guys think I come back to buckets. So they go to the bucket and they pop out the heroin and they jump in the bucket and they sit there. And so when those drugs are circulating in our bloodstream and the heroin goes to try to get into a bucket, Narcan's sitting there and it's like, get in here. So as long as it's flowing in your bloodstream, it doesn't hurt you. But when it starts to get in those buckets, and then that bucket starts to release all those chemicals that make us breathe, to make us awake, all those different things, that's when you start to feel the effects. And so that's what Narcan is designed to do. You can give it a variety of different ways. There was really neat devices came out that you could eject it through it, even talk to you like an AED would, like a automatic external defibrillator, and it would do the same thing. I think for the most part, it's just easier for the intranasally, and it's just as effective. And so I think that's probably what we have seen more often than not. I don't want to get very deep into medical stuff because I know most of our audience isn't medical. But I will tell you that I spend a lot of time re-educating some of our healthcare staff on what Narcan is for. So just from what you understand, someone overdoses, you give them this. What is the goal of Narcan? Right, that's not wrong or right. It's not what I'm looking for, but you're 100% right. But what are the effects of the opiates that you're trying to reverse? Okay, what's the sign? I think someone said over here. Breathing. You're not trying to wake someone up. You're trying to get someone to breathe again so they don't die, so the drug can leave, be excreted naturally. And so many times we see it, and this is in healthcare too, we want someone awake because we don't like it if someone's unconscious. And they give too much of it, and when someone wakes up, you'll hear this very often in healthcare, you say, well, we took away their high. No, you didn't. I hate that phrase. You did not take away someone's high. You put them in day 3 acute withdrawals. And so that's why they wake up and they're mad. They're scared because last time they know they took a drug, now they're, passed out. You're putting them in like the worst of the worst nightmares of withdrawals. The reason why they don't stop is because they're terrified of feeling all the effects that come from acute withdrawals. And so that is why we have to be careful, and you only want to give Narcan to the point where someone is breathing, not to where someone can wake up. This is just some of the side effects. They can be different in different people. But if you can imagine feeling none of those things, body aches, diarrhea, tachycardia, runny nose, your hair standing up on end, sweating, yawning, anxious, all of a sudden this person wakes up, they have people standing around them and they're experiencing every one of those. And like at a 10. And that's why they're violent and that's why they're scared. It's not because we took away their high. We're seeing it more and more used. So we've had AEDs up since 2000 now. Stop the Bleed is following, which was a great class. Glad you guys all got that information. They're following, Stop the Bleed is trying to follow kind of the STARE process of that we did with in the year 2000 with heart attack recognition and calling 911 and delivering an AED to someone if they need that therapy. So the last piece is opioid rescue. And we're already starting to see these. I actually took that picture. Oh gosh, where did I take that? It's not that picture, but I took a similar picture when I was in Del Norte at the high school they built. They just built a new high school. It's gorgeous. And that was literally, it looked just like that. And you're looking at like, man, it's kind of sad. But you know what? If you can eliminate overdoses, someone bleeding to death and heart attacks, you've eliminated the majority of things that people pass away from. And so law enforcement, obviously all EMS has been carrying Narcan for a very long time. But this is something that you're going to see continue to grow to be in places where you have a large number of people. We always get a lot of questions about how is overdoses, how is child abuse, how is domestic violence been affected by the pandemic? And it's very hard to say this is exactly why, but I can tell you for all three of those, and with especially this topic, overdoses have skyrocketed. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but this statistic really, I'm not a huge statistic person, I just try to pick the ones that to me jump out. And so October of 2022, April to October of the following year, there was 150,000 people overdosed. 80% of those overdoses, there was fentanyl in it. I've never talked to a person or seen someone interviewed that knew they took fentanyl. I thought I was taking heroin. I know fentanyl is dangerous. I've heard I don't want fentanyl. But they get addicted to it because it's already mixed in there. They don't understand what I've kind of already explained to you guys and why you kind of have an understanding of why it's mixed in there. And so most people never wanted fentanyl. They know it's dangerous, but it gets put into those substances that they take. Overdoses are now the #1 killer from the age of 18 to 44. You'll see different statistics say different things. And the reason why you saw a split in car crashes were #1 for a while, that's because they didn't add in accidental overdoses. And so a lot of places don't call that anymore, especially in law enforcement. There's a lot of states that actually, if I come and I sell you heroin and you buy heroin from me and you take it and you pass away an overdose because half of it was fentanyl, did you overdose or did you get poisoned? You got poisoned by definition. That's a different crime. And so a lot of states are looking at it like that, and there's people, when they can prove it, which is not always easy, they're getting charged for a variety of like manslaughter and things like that, because it's poisoning. Suboxone is one of those drugs that hit the market, 12 years ago, something like that. And it was supposed to help people get off opiates, but then we were told that you can't get addicted to it, you can't overdose on it, which you really can't. What it is it's even stronger than Narcan. It'll kick Narcan out of a bucket, it jumps in that bucket and sits there for 3 days. So if I gave you a Suboxone, you let it dissolve underneath your tongue, and someone walked up and shot you up with heroin, you'd be like, I don't know what those stuff is with heroin, I don't feel nothing. You won't, because that stuff gets in your bucket and sits there. So people who, maybe their heroin distributor left, or they're having trouble financially affording it, we're starting to see this being used because it also keeps away your signs and symptoms of withdrawal. And so people take Suboxone sometimes to keep withdrawals off until they can take heroin again. And that wasn't the goal for this drug. It was to help people to taper off of opiates and help them tolerate the side effects. But this very much can be abused. The problem that we see this, especially in healthcare, and I had a young gentleman who had a motorcycle crash, and he had road rash, and he had a broken leg. And when we were opening up his wallet, we saw the Suboxone. He was in horrible pain. He was crying. He was like, please give me something. Well, ambulance gave him morphine twice. Oh, he must be a drug addict. I'm like, no, he's in pain. His heart rate's 150. He's something. And so I went over and I'm like, are you in opiate recovery? Or he's like, no. And I go, well, there's Suboxone in your wallet. He goes, yeah, I took some today because it kind of gives you a high effect. I said, well, what happens is with this, and I didn't go through the bucket thing, but I'm like, what happens is this blocks all opiates. Because remember, that the plant I showed you earlier, that's where we get morphine from. My morphine's not going to get in your bucket because you have Suboxone in there. And so I looked at him and was like, I don't know if we can control your pain because you've taken this substance. Now, I know in the back of my mind you can give enough fentanyl and Versed and some other things to pry it out, but it was not an easy thing, and we had to work with the pharmacy to get the right dose. So it's really created a lot of other issues on the healthcare side of things. So great drug if it's used appropriately, like a lot of the things that we talked about. Methamphetamine, this is where I really talk about statistics a lot. Is it better? Is it worse? Meth labs. Especially in Missouri, we saw those go down a ton, 70%. There's laws now for Sudafed, or not Sudafed, but the active precursor there that people get to make it, and those laws have changed in almost every state now. The problem is, where does most methamphetamine come from now? Mexico. So now it's just like any other drug that's manufactured, made. And so when you look at these two numbers, it's actually gone way up. And so that's super scary, right? But you'll hear people talking, you'll hear it on the news, meth labs are down, whatever. Yeah, you're right, meth labs are down. You don't see it as often, but that doesn't mean we don't have a meth issue. And like I said, you'll see varying degrees of, and this was in the United States, not necessarily in Colorado. Meth can also look like a variety of things. It's pure white. The crystal's what we're kind of more familiar with. Liquid is probably the form that we've started to see over the last 5 years. The prison system has problems with this because we found out that people who are incarcerated were getting cards and letters, and they were soaked in methamphetamine, and they would tear the strips like LSD I talked about earlier. And so a lot of the things that people do, the ideas come from people who are incarcerated, and so this is one of the things that we started to see as well, the liquid being utilized for. A New York City detective arrested, maybe not directly, but this young lady, 12 times? Yeah. And was like, oh my gosh, look what this does to her appearance. She looks just completely different. Now, some of the things are different. Obviously, she's smiling, had some effects, dental and all that kind of stuff. He's like, you know what, I think this is a great prevention tool. So I'm gonna put this out. We're gonna start a website, and best intentions in the world. Do you think that's a great prevention tool? What do you guys think? It should make sense, right? Common sense. Remember, I think common sense, we can't really teach it, but it makes sense to me. It's kind of common sense. Here's your problem. 6th grade raised his hands. My grandma does meth and she doesn't look like that. Okay, probably shouldn't share that, but okay. You should get an elementary, middle school, they'll tell you anything. Had a young lady come into triage and sit down. She was there for chest pain or something. We ask everyone, do you take illicit drugs? And sometimes people are honest, and she said yes. I said, well, what do you take? Methamphetamine. I look back at it, and I think she was in her 40s. Anyway, I wrote that down, and I said, how often do you use it? Expecting to hear like once a month. Every day. Okay? How long have you used it? 6 years. You look good. I almost that close to saying that. And I was like, inappropriate, but that's why. Can this happen? Absolutely. There's a lot of other factors before that happens. So I'm not saying it can't be used in certain ways, but just to put that out there, because a lot of people are going to look and go, that's not true. My cousin does meth. I've done meth, and I just didn't wake up and my teeth were rotting out. And so once again, I'm not saying it can't be used, but today's drug addict or person that we're concerned about, that's the pictures we need to show. It's the everyday person. Males, females, every color that we have in our country, one-time use. And this will grab people's attention a lot more than that other slide. Because these are normal young kids that were in high school who tried something once or twice and had a devastating result because of it. I'm at Missouri State University talking to 300 sorority girls in Missouri. How many of you take meth? We're not stupid. Sorry, I didn't mean to offend your delicate nature. So we're talking about tons of different drugs. How many of you know what Molly is? Almost every hand went up. How many of you have taken it? 60%? Raise their hand. How many of you would take it? 80%. Like, okay, who can tell me what it is? No hands. It's ecstasy. I'm like, okay, all right, it's ecstasy. But what is ecstasy? What is it? Well, I don't know. Can someone Google it for me? So I had a young lady Google it, and I said, can you read off to me what is in ecstasy or that? And she did a very good job. She said that first word. Methylene deoxymethamphetamine. And everyone went silent. Guys, this isn't DEA information. I'm not giving you you could have Googled it. You've put methamphetamine into your body. The same thing that you said you're not stupid because you know what it is, and I believe you. But because Beyonce sings about it, and all of a sudden it's okay to take. I'm not picking on Beyonce, a lot of them sing about it, right? And so you cannot feel that good. You can't get up on that scale without amphetamine. It's impossible. Our bucket system is not designed that way that you could do that. And I do. I don't know. I think it had an impact. And I'm like I said, this isn't top secret information. The other problem with ecstasy or Molly is it's all different. We have patients come in, and I believe them. I just took Molly, and they'll pop positive for methamphetamine, of course. They'll pop positive for opiates, cocaine, marijuana. Like, I haven't taken any, and I believe them. But you have no idea what's in any pill that is made synthetically or just made and given to you. You have no idea what it is. Okay. This is and this really, we talked already quite a bit about this in the fentanyl, but this is where the drug cartels are really marketing toward with a lot of these new designer drugs. And I'm not going to talk about all of these. I know that's pretty hard to see. And there's a ton of slang terminology, bath salts, K2, all these kind of things that we've heard about for years, but all of them are synthetically made, either made in a lab. Most of them are remade. They're not brand new ideas that a chemist that works for the cartel came up with. Right now, there's hundreds of chemical companies in the United States that are trying to come up with the next new pain medicine to help people with cancer. And good for them. The problem is when something doesn't work, they're like, oh my gosh, this drug was terrible. It's so much stronger, and people hallucinate on it. We put it on the shelf. Well, then the drug cartel says, I have a customer that would enjoy that. And so they take it off the shelf, and then they recreate it. So all of the drugs that you hear about, almost none of them are new. Very few are older than 2 or 3 years. All of them are old recipes that failed years ago for legitimate reasons, and now they're being recreated by the cartels. The name of the terminal, they're just everywhere. I mean, you just can't keep up with all the different slang terminologies out there. But typically, they try to pick a name that's going to make the consumer feel safe. Most people in the United States feel like marijuana is not that big a deal, right? And so that's why K2 came out and said it's synthetic marijuana. Marijuana, nothing in that plant. It's something completely different. But they picked that. Ooh. Oh, can you guys see that on your thing? I have a thing that says allow or don't allow on my iPad. I'm going to hit. I'm not going to mess up anything if I hit allow or don't allow. It says ID has been requested, and it's gone. Thank you. All right. Anywho, but basically that's how these drugs came about. I'm going to skip through a couple of these just to stay on time. These are the ones that scare me. So these are the 2 chemicals I mentioned earlier, and I've only been talking about them for about 7 months, so I haven't got the pronunciation 100% down. You can see the slang terminology. These are the ones that are scary because, like I said, they're so much stronger than even fentanyl, and there is no reversal agent, because that drug will stay in the bucket and you can't pry it out. So these patients, if you don't get to them and basically breathe for them and make their heart beat for them until that can pop out on its own, that patient's going to die. We're seeing a lot of it up in the Northeast. Like Philadelphia and a lot of the other eastern states are seeing about 20% of their heroin have this in it. As far as I know, and I've checked with quite a bit of resources, we have not seen these in Colorado. Doesn't mean we won't. It just simply means that these are very scary. So, what else? Yep, I already talked about how they're made. Talked about that. Xylazine. I do want to mention this briefly. About 15 years ago, I talked about xylazine. It's actually a veterinary medicine. And it was given to horses so they could have procedures done on them. And then they quickly found out that if you mix this with heroin, it would have these profound effects that people really enjoyed. And I talked about it for a long time. I'm like, okay, maybe this one's not coming to the U.S. It was some other countries. And I thought, okay, I guess it's not coming. But actually what we've seen over the last 5 or 8 years, especially in 2019, it has, for whatever reason, Pennsylvania has had a ton of this in it, to where it's in 36% of overdose deaths. And why? Why Pennsylvania? I don't know. I don't know if the drug cartel pipe system has and you'd be surprised. Sometimes they will actually be trying this drug, maybe on a certain region. Do you feel like, because they don't want to kill any people. The cartel doesn't want to kill their customer. But I've heard some variety of different things, but xylazine, if I had to guess, would be the next one that we start to see. Oh gosh, okay, I'll talk about it briefly, just because this is my favorite topic when I had to talk about this with young people. So when I talk about marijuana with younger people, I have really kind of one takeaway. Please don't drive. We can talk about all the other stuff, the debates, and I don't mind having those, just don't drive. And because I'll have people, how many of you feel like you can drive or seen people drive as well on marijuana? And a lot of hands will go up. I'm like, so it takes you 20 minutes to open up a bag of Cheetos, but you can drive a car. And then like, oh, I guess that's right. So there's a lot of issues that surrounds marijuana. I would tell you from the prevention side, when I talk to younger people, it really is. Because you can't argue that. They're like, yeah, people act pretty messed up, and do you want them driving your sister home from school? No, all right? And so that's kind of the biggest thing I talk about with them. The rest of my slides, and we're about out of time, and I want to get some questions. I'll be honest, and I'll move through them just kind of quickly. I will say this, what does this mean? All this kind of stuff we've talked about. I really think that experimentation piece is so important, and we have to, when we work with our younger people, we have to educate them in a way that they'll make their own informed decision, because it's the only way that we have a successful chance of getting past some of this stuff. I think early access to Narcan and things like that are awesome, but you have to attack a huge issue like this from multiple ways, from our legal system to prevention to education and a variety of other ways. But I will say that I'm very concerned about our country just in general, and not that I think gun violence and other things aren't a huge topic, but very rarely does it even make national media when 15 people overdose within a 3-hour time window at somewhere. Is that different than that many people getting shot? Those lives were lost. I think gun awareness is huge. It's a huge topic, but I just feel like that we need more awareness towards some of this stuff. It's the number one killer, for heaven's sakes. Other stuff, this will all move kind of quick. Cough syrup is still one of the popular things that we see people drink. I mentioned cough syrup because Narcan will work on two other things that aren't opiate, and this is one of them. So if someone overdoses on cough syrup, Narcan works about 30 to 40% it will work. And it's because it has chemical similarities to opiates and how it works. And this is why people have that same feeling from it. Inhalant, still the most probably easy accessible. That one you see in your bottom left-hand side, the air spray, is still probably the most abused, just because it's still legal to purchase. And I don't know how people do it. Like, that can get super cold, but there's YouTube videos of people inhaling this stuff, and it has a profound effect. If you take hand sanitizer, like 2 ounces, and mix a teaspoon of salt in it, it literally turns into Everclear. Actually, I'm sorry, vodka. It's the same alcohol content. And so that's why hospitals, we don't have hand sanitizer, we have foam. It's because of that reason. And so some of the things that you wouldn't actually think about, and this also came from our correctional system. So this is another issue that we've seen in people who have, addiction problems with, especially alcohol. There's things out there. And if you run it through a cheesecloth, which I don't even know what that is, but anyway, it actually is as close to vodka as you can possibly get. Yeah, there we go. Studies say 70% of alcohol. Yeah. Okay, guys, that's a ton of. I'll quit talking because most of you are probably mortified by this point. And like I said, I'll stay here as long as that you want me to and answer any type of questions. There's my contact information, right? Yeah. And so you can email me for any questions or additional information. I'm happy to share that with you, but I'm not a parenting expert. There's some microphones in each of the aisles. So anybody wants to pop up and answer, ask a question, or I don't mind repeating your question if you don't want to get up. Can you explain dabbing? So dabbing is actually something that that we've seen with cannabis. And so it can either be my understanding when it first came out, it was that's why I have pictures, sorry to explain, but it looks like a gel type substance. And then they will put that either in an e-cigarette, or you can actually do it just directly through smoking it. But that's what dabbing is essentially. And you only, instead of smoking like 3 marijuana cigarettes, for example, you take 1 or 2 hits off that and they're getting the same high content. And I would say that the e-cigarettes, when there's a lot of the cannabis out there that you can't smell. Like, I talk to high school students and they'll lean their head in, take a hit out of their locker, and they'll just slowly let the air go. Unless you're sitting right there, you can't even smell it. But dabbing has a super high concentration of THC in it, but a small amount. Yes?
So, what do you what do you do when somebody who is high walks into a building on a Sunday morning, and if you don't have, well, is there a way to easily de-escalate them walking in if they're acting crazy? And if not, any ideas on what you do?
So, and this has always been a pet peeve with me, especially when I did a lot of pre-hospital. You can't argue with people who are that impaired, whether it's alcohol or drugs or whatever. So unfortunately, as much as you don't want to get, you want to be able to talk someone down, sometimes even the best de-escalator, it's just not, because the words that you're saying, they don't hear and they can't comprehend and process. So unfortunately, a lot of times you're going to have to call your security or even law enforcement to try to remove them as quiet as you possibly can. But then some others you can, right? And sometimes it's the person too. There's some people, for whatever reason, you can tell, and I don't know why that is, but there's some people like that, I don't like you, and I don't know why, but I'll talk to you. And we see that a lot in the hospital. Like, Cindy, don't go in there. He doesn't like you for whatever reason. And so sometimes having different people try to talk to him, but really it's super hard. But I can tell you that within a couple minutes, you should know if this person's going to be able to, figure out if you're going to be able to de-escalate them. Hopefully remove them from the area where many people is, whether it's going out in the hall and talking to somebody while someone else is calling for resources. But what you don't want to do, and I didn't get into a lot of this part, is those those people can become very violent very quickly. And so that's the reason why I would always err on the side of bringing in resources. And that's the reason when we see these patients that are very difficult for law enforcement to deal with, because they don't want to hurt people because they know that's a medical issue, especially when you're dealing with those synthetics. But yeah, so unfortunately you have to err on the side of getting more resources and safely get them.
Are there good ways to identify somebody who's not showing obvious effects of narcotics or being under the influence?
It depends on what the drug is. And his question was, can you tell if someone's like impaired by something without those, if they're not just acting crazy? And you can. Typically, it's some of the things are more medical. They're pupillary or they're slurred speech or maybe interrupting during inappropriate times, different things like that. And some people aren't dangerous to people. They just simply need to be removed and talked to and, hey, maybe you should come back tomorrow, whatever the case is. But there's no one set thing because every drug acts different in someone's body. And so where some people will start talking and try to interrupt everybody, and then someone just sits there and like doing the narcotic nod, where it looks like they're asleep most of the time. Yes?
With the drugs that don't respond to Narcan, if you had somebody that was showing signs that you would normally give them Narcan, would you still do that?
Yes.
And how do you know when you've hit too much?
Too much Narcan, you mean? So the Narcan is very safe. And so when you give somebody Narcan and they're breathing, so they're breathing 12, 14 times a minute, and their skin looks good, and they're not blue, their lips aren't blue, you're done. If you give too much, then that person's going to wake up in acute withdrawals, and they may become angry or violent. And that's where now you have to try to hold someone down until the ambulance gets there, and now it's kind of like a wrestling match. And so starting off small and repeating doses, this is what we would kind of recommend with that, if you have the ability to do that with whichever type of Narcan you're giving. Yes, sir.
What about the argument of just legalizing drugs and then providing test facilities to make people safe?
And there's actually a place that does that with heroin in Harlem, in New York, that are doing that right now. They have a place where people can come in and do their heroin, and they have like 6 overdoses a week or something still there, but they can recognize and give people Narcan. That's not my area of expertise, and so I'm always careful with it sounds crazy to me. I understand some of those arguments, but so I guess I have very limited knowledge of them, and from what I've heard, it just seems pretty scary when you're talking about heroin and some of the narcotics that we've been kind of talking about here today, more than just like marijuana or cannabis, for example. Any other questions? Yes.
Final.
Last question. Yeah, I don't want to take the time.
A colleague of mine at Redbox was working a gate and got dosed. We don't know how. Is that possible from skin contact, or what would be
There are drugs that you can get it from like if someone doesn't swallow it. And this is a big debate. Fentanyl is not one of them. There's a lot of people that think you can get fentanyl from contact. That is actually, per the poison control and FDA, that's actually not possible, but you can breathe it. So if you walk in and there's powder and you breathe it through your nares, you can get it that way. But just to go in and put contact, actually it's been shown that that's not effective. But there are some other drugs that you can. Ketamine is one of those. There's another couple. Typically, they're hallucinogenics that will absorb through your skin. It's difficult to do, but there are some that you can do that with. Guys, I'm going to get off here, and I'll stay here close. So after we get done, I'll answer your questions. Thank you.
Jason, thank you very much.